I heard her scream twice. The first time, I stopped walking. My hand went to the door. My heart was already through it. The second time, Officer Donnell grabbed my arm. Torres. His voice was low, flat, the kind of flat that means don't. Someone's in there, I said. Someone's always in there. He didn't look at me when he said it. Keep moving. I stood in that hallway for 4 seconds. I counted them. And then, God help me, I kept moving. My name is Jessica Torres. I've been a correctional officer at Riverside Correctional Facility for 3 years. And the night I walked past cell 19, I made a decision I will spend the rest of my life thinking about. It was a Tuesday in February, second week of a new rotation. I'd been transferred to C Block's overflow wing temporarily, short-staffed. As always, the overflow wing was older, darker, quieter than C Block proper. The fluorescent lights down there had this flicker that never got fixed. You'd walk the corridor and your shadow would stutter on the walls like a broken film reel. I didn't know the inmates on that wing well yet. I didn't know Officer Donnell well either. 3 weeks as co-partners, barely enough time to learn how someone takes their coffee. He was experienced, 15 years in. Quiet. The kind of officer who moved through the facility like he'd already seen everything twice. That night we were on the 10 p.m. round. Routine. Check the doors. Log the count. Move on. Cell 17. Cell 18. Cell 19. That's when I heard it. Not loud. That's what I want you to understand. It wasn't a scream that echoed. It was the kind of sound that gets swallowed by concrete. A sound someone makes when they've learned that screaming loud doesn't work anymore. So they scream small. And I almost missed it. But I didn't miss it. And that's exactly where the problem began. The next morning, I went back to that wing on my own time. Before my shift officially started, before the morning count, before anyone who might ask questions was watching. Cell 19 housed a woman named Renata Okafor, 34. I'd seen her name on the board but hadn't exchanged more than a nod. She was in for distribution charges, 18 months, halfway through her sentence. No disciplinary record. No flags. When I came to her door, she was sitting on the edge of her bunk, hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a bus. She looked at me the way inmates look at officers when they've learned not to expect anything. Patient. Distant. Already somewhere else. Renata. I kept my voice low. I was on rounds last night. I heard something. She didn't move. Didn't blink. Are you okay? The silence lasted long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she looked down at her hands. I'm fine, Officer Torres. She wasn't fine. I could see that much. Her left wrist had a bruise on it that hadn't been there 2 days ago during inspection. I would have logged it. The bruise was the wrong shape for a fall. Too linear. Too intentional. Renata, I need you to tell me. I said I'm fine. Sharper this time. And then quieter, please. I left, but I didn't let it go. I spent my lunch break pulling her file. Not because the rules required it. They didn't. Not yet, but because something in my chest wouldn't sit right. You work in a prison long enough. You develop a sense for the difference between an inmate who doesn't want to talk and an inmate who can't. Renta Okafor couldn't. I was on my second read of her incident history. Clean, completely clean. When I heard Donnell's voice behind me. You're wasting your time. I hadn't heard him come in. I closed the folder, more out of instinct than anything else. She file a complaint? He asked. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. Relaxed. The kind of relaxed that's actually very tense. No, then there's nothing to chase. She had a bruise on her wrist. They all have bruises. Torres. He pushed off the doorframe. That's what happens when you live in a cage. You bump into things. He left. I sat there with the folder and thought about the way he'd said her name. Not Renata. Not Okafor. He hadn't used her name at all. That was the moment. Right there, I started to understand what was really happening. Now here's what I want to ask you something. If you were me, sitting in that break room, File closed, your partner's footsteps fading down the hall. What would you do? Because I want you to hold that question. Because what I found next changed everything I thought I knew about that wing. I went back to Renata that evening. Different approach. I brought her a cup of coffee from the officer's station, which is against minor protocol but not unheard of. A small human gesture. She looked at the cup like it might be a trick. I'm not here officially, I said. I'm just here. She wrapped both hands around the cup. The bruise on her left wrist pressed flat against the ceramic. Officer Torres. Her voice was careful, measured. There are things that happen on this wing. Things that have been happening for a long time. Tell me. If I tell you, she stopped, started again. They are officers here who have been here longer than I've been alive. And there is a system. And the system is not about the inmates. I felt the cold move up my back. Who? She looked at me for a long time. Really looked, the way you look at someone when you're deciding whether to hand them something fragile. I don't know you, she said finally. I know. I've seen officers come in here with good intentions. She set the cup down. I've watched those intentions get managed. Managed. The word sat between us. What happened last night, Renata? She pulled the sleeve of her jumpsuit down over the bruise. Slowly, deliberately. I slipped, she said, in the shower. I left that cell feeling sick. Not because she wouldn't talk. I understood why she couldn't. But because in 14 years of people working this wing, something had been allowed to grow in the dark. And no one had turned on a light. The next 2 days I watched. Really watched. I started noticing patterns I'd missed before. The way certain officers lingered near cell 19 after lights out. The way Donnell would appear at the end of certain hallways when he had no assignment there. The way the camera mounted at the junction of the overflow corridor had been angled, just slightly, barely enough to notice, so that it pointed 3 degrees away from cell 19's door. 3 degrees. That's all it takes. 3 degrees and you disappear. I documented everything in a personal notebook, not a department log. I was careful about that. I didn't know yet who was involved, how high it went, whether my reports would land on the right desk or be quietly buried. On the 3rd day, Renata sent me a message through the unofficial channel inmates use, a folded piece of paper tucked inside a returned library book. 3 words. Please be careful. Think about what it takes for a woman who has spent months learning to trust no one to write 3 words on a piece of paper and hand them to a correctional officer. That's not nothing. That's everything. And it told me I was right, and that I was in the middle of something much larger than one bruise on one woman's wrist. On day 4, I made a mistake. I confronted Donnell directly. I know how that sounds now. But I was 3 years in, not 15. I still believed that if you put the truth in front of someone, the institution would respond. That there was a correct procedure and the procedure worked. I've been watching the camera angles on the overflow wing, I told him. We were alone in the equipment room during shift change. The junction camera. It's been rotated. He looked at me for a long moment. Nothing in his face moved. Maintenance adjusted it last month, he said. Angle of reflection from the new lighting. It's in the log. Can I see the log? Sure. He held my gaze. File a formal request. Takes about 2 weeks. He walked out. I stood there in the equipment room, and I felt something I hadn't felt in that building since my first week. Genuine fear. Not the everyday alertness that keeps you safe in a facility. Not the cautious awareness you develop over time. Actual fear. Because Donnell had just told me, without saying a single incriminating word, that he knew I was watching. And that he wasn't concerned. That meant one of 2 things. Either I was wrong, or he was very protected. I went home that night and sat at my kitchen table until 2 in the morning. My mother called. I didn't pick up. My coffee went cold. I sat there with my notebook open, and I asked myself the question that every person in this kind of situation eventually has to ask: how much is this going to cost me? Because there's always a cost. I knew that. I'd seen it. Officers who filed complaints that went nowhere, who got quietly reassigned, whose promotional paths suddenly narrowed. The system doesn't always punish you loudly. Sometimes it just makes things harder. Slowly, quietly, for a very long time. But then I thought about Renata's 3 words on that folded piece of paper. Please be careful. She was the one inside the cage. She was the one with nowhere to go. She was the one who needed to be careful, and she'd used her warning to tell me. I opened my laptop, and this is where I need you to stay with me, because what I found when I started digging into the official records for that wing, the real records, going back 4 years, was something that made my hands shake. And that changed everything about what I thought I was dealing with. 4 years of incident reports, 4 years of slipped in the shower, 4 years of inmate declined medical evaluation, 4 years of camera maintenance logs filed in weeks when nothing else on that wing was logged. 6 women, 6 different names, 6 different charges, sentences, backgrounds, all of them on the overflow wing during the same rotation, all of them quiet after a certain point, all of them transferred out early, administrative discretion. The file said, which is a phrase that can mean many things and prove nothing. I sat at that kitchen table and I thought about all the screams that got swallowed by concrete, about all the women who learned to scream small. I reported it the next morning, not to my direct supervisor, not to the shift captain. I went to the facility's inspector general office and I put my notebook, my photographs of the camera angle, my documented patterns, and the printed incident report comparisons on a desk, and I said, I need someone to look at this. The investigator across from me was a woman named Chua. She was in her 50s, calm, the kind of calm that means she's seen serious things before and knows how to hold them. She read for a long time without speaking. Then she looked up and said, How long have you been sitting on this? 4 days. Why didn't you come sooner? I was honest. I was scared. She nodded, like that was the right answer, like she respected it more than if I'd said I wasn't. You're going to need to stay very professional on that wing for the next several weeks, she said. Act normal. Document everything. Don't tell anyone you're here. That happens to Renata. We'll look at all of them. I walked out of that building into the February morning and I stood on the sidewalk and I breathed. 3 weeks later, Officer Donnell was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. 2 other officers from that rotation were also flagged. The overflow wing was reassigned. I don't know everything that happened after that. Investigations are slow, and they are private, and I was told, politely but clearly, that my involvement had ended the moment I filed the report. That's how it works. You hand it over, and then you have to trust the system you just went around. Renata was transferred to a different facility closer to her family while the investigation ran. I heard that much through channels. I don't know what she told investigators. I hope she could finally say it out loud. What I know is this. I went back to that hallway once more before the wing was reassigned. I stood outside cell 19 in the dark with the flickering light stuttering overhead, and I thought about those 4 seconds. The 4 seconds I stood at that door and didn't open it. I can't have them back. That's the thing about this job. You don't get to rewind. You make the call you make and you live with it. But I came back. That has to count for something. I'm Jessica Torres. I work in a place where people have been forgotten by the world outside. And the one thing I've learned, the thing I carry with me every single shift, is that the most dangerous thing inside any institution isn't the inmates. It's the silence. It's the 3 degrees of rotation. It's the partner who says keep moving in a voice that means don't. The job asks you to follow the system, but your conscience asks you something different. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, you have to choose. I chose 4 days too late, but I chose. If this story meant something to you, hit like and subscribe. I share real stories from C Block every week, not to sensationalize, but because these moments deserve to be seen. Next video, I'll tell you about the night an inmate handed me a piece of paper with a name on it, a name I recognized, and why I almost didn't report what I knew.